folks. We appreciate you all coming out for this, the final installment of the series, the lecture series on Catholic education here at the Norbertine community. This is sponsored by the Norbertine Library of Santa Maria de Vid Abbey. I'm Father Stephen. I am the nominal director of the Norbertine Library, and this will be the concluding lecture. We will have in April an online, that is virtual symposium that will feature our three speakers. That is, of course, for tonight, Brother Ernest Miller, Ms. Donna Illebrun, Superintendent of Catholic Schools, and then Dr. Matthew Doherty, also a Reverend, Norbertine, who is a professor of biology at St. Norbert College. They will all participate in that virtually. That will, of course, be something you'll be able to log into from the comfort of your home. More information will be forthcoming as we get closer to that event. But let's just recap a little bit before we begin tonight what this journey has been. And when this lecture series was conceptualized, it was with the understanding that we live at a moment right now where perhaps questions about the function of education are maybe more prescient than ever before. And also the questions about what is the role and the validity of Catholicism, in a modern society, in a society right now that is very divided, where we face many challenges. And so this notion of Catholicism, Christianity really writ large, and how that relates to education, really what the mission of these two things are together, that has very much animated this lecture series. Of course, Ms. Illebrun, talked at length and very eloquently about the Catholic school system here in New Mexico and how it compares, what advantages it gives when we think about that with respect to public education. There was a lot of understanding of that Catholic education, K through 12, does offer some very significant advantages to students, to families. And of course, it bears with it, the social mission of the church. Father Matthew, also, Dr. Matthew, in his role as a both priest and biologist, he talked to a great extent about how Catholic education at the university level, at the higher education level, how that is very much ingrained in terms of the mission of Catholic education as we think about it, in the United States, but really the roots of Catholic education globally. He talked really about the rise of the modern university and how the Catholic institution was very integral in that history, and really thinking about what is it, specifically about Catholic education, a Catholic institution of higher education that again offers something different, something important when we think about the role of education, and specifically Catholic education in our culture. And tonight, in our concluding lecture with Brother Ernest Miller, a De La Salle Christian brother, we are going to explore a little more specifically how Catholic education and the Church's call in a post-Vatican II church to spread the values of the reign of God, specifically thinking about social justice, thinking about how church teaching and how Catholic education is absolutely essential to inculcating the values of living the justice, the social justice mission of the church in the modern world, as Gaudium et Spes reminds us, how all of that works together. Okay, and so it's a fitting capstone for this lecture series prior to us getting to our symposium that again will feature all three speakers. And so this is a wonderful occasion. Of course, by way of introduction, I've known Brother Ernest for over 10 years. We met when we were studying at Catholic Theological Union in Chicago. He was working on a Doctor of Ministry degree, and I was completing my MDiv degree, and we became fast friends. We found that we have a common sense of mission, a common sense of purpose, and a common sense of vocation when it comes to education in addition to Catholicism. But I thought it was very important that he add his voice to this lecture series, because he is part of a congregation that is devoted to models of education, to the mission of education. The De La Salle Christian Brothers are pillars of that educational foundation in the Catholic Church worldwide. Indeed, their congregation is much bigger than the Norbertines at this point. And so this is a wonderful opportunity to get another voice and perspective into this conversation. Brother Ernest is currently, I think you said you're going to have to help me here, the director of the Adrian Nail Project, and that is right now, that's in Lower Manhattan?
It's itinerant across our province.
Okay.
Yeah, but I live and work out of.
Very good. And so when you get up here, you can explain it with a little more detail. It was multiple sentences, and so I just told him at that point I wasn't going to be able to remember it. But in his previous role, you were also a vice president at LaSalle University, and that is, I believe, in Philadelphia. So you are always a well-spoken and well-traveled and well-seasoned individual, every time you have visited us or that I have had the opportunity to visit you. And so I told a friend of mine not long ago, after your last visit here to Santa Maria de la Vid Abbey, that the interesting thing about Ernest is whenever I have a conversation with him, I learn something new. And I think, I can't say that about everybody, but I think that's a real gift, and I think it definitely testifies to his identity vocationally as well as a man, as a Christian, as fundamentally a very, very good educator. And so without any further ado or me making any additional mistakes, I will present Brother Ernest.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. Well, it's good to be with you here at the Abbey. I'm privileged by the invitation to join you in this series, and I hope I will be able to offer some thoughts for us this evening going forward. Just a word or three to add to what Stephen generously offered. So I am a brother of the Christian schools. That is our corporate name, our founding name. We are popularly known as the De La Salle Christian Brothers. So we are 344 years young, so though we might be bigger in number, we are much the youth to the Norbertines. And so I am a member of the LaSallian District of Eastern North America. So we have 3 districts, or provinces, we officially call our geographic regions districts. So we have 3 districts in the U.S., and I belong to the LaSallian District of Eastern North America. And I am based in New York City. I am part of a 4-person team within our Office for Mission and Ministry. And so my work is itinerant. I am the director of what is called the Adrian Nail Project. It's a fancy name for doing mission education and formation, essentially. And so I work primarily, or first and foremost, with teachers, new teachers, young teachers, as well as veteran teachers. Just came just a few days ago from a retreat outside Baltimore with first and second year teachers in our schools in our East Coast district. And so that is some of what I do, in addition to cross-pollination with other members of the team. So working on issues relating to boards of trustees, right, which, as I think the superintendent would know and others, deep in education, working with boards, and the education and the formation of boards today is crucial. And also working with students as well. So there's someone in our office who specifically oversees things for youth and young adults. But again, we cross-pollinate along the way. But more than anything, I'm a classroom brother. And even though I'm away from the regular classroom right now, I'm a classroom brother. The classroom is a sacred space for me. I love the classroom. So with that just little background, why don't we move forward with the presentation this evening. And you can see the title that I've chosen, and I'll come to break down the title a little bit more in just a moment. So let us just take a moment, as we often do in our LaSallian settings, to recall the holy presence of God. Just a few weeks ago, from the 11th through the 13th of January, the University of San Diego, USD, kicked off its 75th anniversary with a national conference on Catholic higher education called Lighting the Way Forward, roughly 175 individuals convened to discuss the purpose of Catholic higher education in a rapidly changing world. Among the participants were faculty, staff, and administrators from USD and other Catholic universities across the country, in addition to local K-12 Catholic school educators and others from the Catholic Diocese of San Diego. Cardinal McElroy, the diocesan bishop, presided at the opening Eucharistic liturgy and delivered the opening keynote address. The purpose of the gathering was to explore what it means to be a Catholic university at this moment in history, deeply concerned about and engaged with the interrelated challenges of climate change, structural racism, lack of trust in institutions, and breakdown of communities, polarizing political discourse, religious disaffiliation, and more. Anticipating the conference, USD Vice President of Mission Integration, Michael Levette Collier, observed, "The conference is an exciting opportunity to bring together people from across the United States who work in Catholic education to discern how we can continue to play a meaningful role going forward." In light of Michael's assertion, this presentation aims to explore the meaningful role Catholic education writ large can play through the lens of the Catholic social tradition, CST. I want to take up this subject under the theme, Educating for the Reign of God to Teach as Jesus Did. I spotlight Justitio in Mundo, Justice in the World, the 1971 Synod of Bishops document, as well as draw upon other texts within the corpus of Catholic social and spiritual traditions as a lens to grasp the gravity of the task to teach as Jesus did. For Catholic education, witnessing the gospel of Jesus Christ requires teaching and spreading the reign of God, the biblical symbol that should function as horizon and finality, writes Thomas Roche, S.J., in Educating for Faith and Justice, Catholic Higher Education Today. To make God's reign transpire through Christian spirituality of education offers ground for what this lecture envisions. This spirituality, at its most fundamental level, aims to shape an educator's consciousness as an agent of God's liberating salvation. So this title, Educating for the Reign of God, comes to us because that is the ultimate purpose of Christian education. The reign of God, as we know, was the central purpose and passion of Jesus' life. And Thomas Groome from Boston College tells us in his most recent book, What Makes Education Catholic, the reign of God poses the ultimate vision to guide our whole curriculum and the learning outcomes we are to offer in students' lives. The whole curriculum. As I was just saying just a week ago Friday at a symposium of nearly 600 educators from our 9 LaSallian educational institutions in the San Francisco Bay Area, when we listen to Groome talk about the whole curriculum and learning outcomes should reflect the reign of God, it's not just about the religion curriculum. The whole of the curriculum to reflect the values and the virtues of the reign of God. And so in this time with you this evening, we will have 3 movements. Okay, there we go. And so first, I want to address Catholic social teaching, the biblical foundations for CST, and also just a word or two about the spirituality of education. And then the second movement to look at the call of Scripture and the call of the Catholic social tradition to Catholic education. How does Catholic education hear that call? And then third, some of my thoughts incomplete, but borrowing from some good sources. Reaching New Horizons, Catholic Education, Justice, and Hope. So that's what we're going to try to do in our time this evening. So let's move forward with movement number 1. We could be here all night citing passages from Scripture that speaks to us of the call to justice, but I'm just going to cite one. Deuteronomy 16:20. Justice, and only justice, shall you pursue. I begin with acknowledging that contemporary Catholic theological thought, as well as official Catholic social teachings, is rooted in our biblical heritage. John R. Donahue, S.J., one of the great scholars of the Word, puts forward a succinct working definition of the biblical perspective of justice. In general terms, the biblical idea of justice can be described as fidelity to the demands of a relationship. In contrast to modern individualism, the Israelite is in a world where to live is to be united to others in a social context, either by bonds of family or by covenant relationships. This web of relationships, king with people, judge with complainants, family with tribe and kingfolk, the community with the resident alien and with the suffering in their midst, and all with the covenant God, constitutes the world in which life is played out. So here, sisters and brothers, we see the scriptural conception of justice assumes building a community of persons and institutions that strive to live justly. The challenges of the biblical vision of justice for Christian discipleship requires faithfulness to the profound meaning of Jesus' revelation of God, hearing the word of God. One of the conditions that called forth scathing criticism from Christ was the human blindness about him. Not the physical blindness that he cured, writes Kevin Seasoltz, but the spiritual blindness that came from the failure to hear the word, calling persons to conversion. In announcing that the reign of God is here, the conversion Jesus espoused in the gospel was a call to live justly, requiring that we confront structures of societal sin that undermines the fidelity to the demands of a relationship. So my choice to probe this subject flow out of my persistent personal quest to tie together my religious orientation and democratic hopes. Reading Howard Thurman and Martin Luther King Jr., among other towering figures, I began to understand the import of the grand democratic tradition and the prophetic Hebrew and Christian traditions. Respectfully, the legacies of Athens and Jerusalem, as Cornel West likes to describe it, that ask fundamental questions about the anawim. Where are the vulnerable, the marginalized, the downtrodden, and the disinherited, as Howard Thurman likes to say, in the theological discourse? Who is marshaling the intellectual and spiritual resources to wrestle with unjustified human suffering, unnecessary social misery, and unmerited affliction? The same question that Thurman raised many decades ago remains as relevant as ever in the struggles for recognition centered on cultural injustice and the struggles for economic equity centered on material inequities. Thurman asks, why it is that Christianity seems impotent to deal radically and therefore effectively with the issues of discrimination and injustice. Is this impotency due to a betrayal of the genius of the religion? Or is it due to a basic weakness in the religion itself? So hold on to that question. One of the central elements of the spirituality of education ingrained in the Catholic Christian faith, Boston College's Thomas Groome suggests, is historicity. A Catholic historicity conceives past traditions, a source of knowledge and wisdom, as fraught with a rich legacy. In a book called My Pedagogic Creed, John Dewey's famous educational belief statement construes this historical wealth as the funded capital of civilization, a treasure we inherit. Groome comments on Dewey. Without it, that is, this funded capital of civilization, we'd be greatly impoverished. This appreciation and respect for past capital does not mean that we are to passively inherit and simply repeat it. Life is always an open horizon. Our present and future are not reruns and should not be held captive by the past. Thus, Dewey's great intuition, which Groome echoes, offers a critical understanding of historical resources as linked to present identity construction. So there, sisters and brothers, just when you hear Dewey talk about, and Groome echoing Dewey talk about identity construction, keep that in mind when we get to movement 3, when I hope to bring together thoughts about, again, how do we continue to marshal our Catholic identity, specifically in the mission field of education. So Groome goes further to say that there are 4 dimensions of engagement with funded capital. 1, reflectively and creatively appropriate the historical legacy. 2, appreciate its reservoir of knowledge and wisdom. 3, probe its shortcomings and limitations. And 4, build upon it to create what is generative for today and tomorrow. So I want to suggest that each of those dimensions we can connect to the reservoir of the Catholic social tradition. And to the extent that we can connect them to the reservoir of the Catholic social tradition, then we should be able to connect them to the reservoir of Catholic education. So let's pause for a moment and let me just invite you to digest for a moment what you've already heard as we conclude movement 1. What do you see? What do you hear so far? What strikes you? Indeed, is there something you've heard thus far that unsettles you, unnerves you? So digest for a moment, and perhaps it becomes a comment or question a bit later. So movement 2, the call of Scripture and the call of the Catholic social tradition. To teach as Jesus did, Catholic education is called to act with prophetic audacity, to build the reign of God here and now. Is action on behalf of justice a defining element of Catholic education? I contend that the Catholic social tradition is a touchstone, a foundation stone for the mission of Catholic education writ large and higher education institutions in particular. Suzanne Shanahan, Executive Director of the Center for Social Concerns at the University of Notre Dame, asserts, CST is a call to action for all to aspire to a more just world. It offers a way of seeing, being, and doing that engages moral imagination, inspires moral courage, and implores moral action. So the basic principles whereby the influence of the gospel has made itself felt in contemporary social life are to be found in the body of teaching, set out in a gradual and timely way from the encyclical Rerum Novarum in 1891 on the rights and duties of capital and labor to Fratelli Tutti, brothers and sisters all. So let's take a little trip for a few moments, just to take a glimpse at this rich tradition. So where does it begin? This rich Catholic social tradition, and I should say, when we talk about the social tradition, it includes both official Catholic social teaching, which I'll further reference in a moment, and then what we refer to as Catholic social thought. That is the work of theologians and other practitioners who comment on, critique Catholic social teaching, pushes official Catholic social teaching, and so together we tend to refer to them as the Catholic social tradition. So what is the beginnings of this tradition? We can refer to the early church theologians such as St. Basil and Ambrose, the gradual development and growth of charitable institutions, including hospitals and orphanages, the gradual emergence of religious institutes, religious orders, and other church organizations. And then Fred Kamer, S.J., Southern Jesuit, helps pull it together with this statement. The Catholic social tradition offers a long-standing and profound corpus, body of thought and teaching that draws upon classical texts and tradition in a full range of social spheres, economic, political, religious, cultural, and familial. Again, we can see some connection to what Dewey and Groom are referring to in their conversation, right, around this funded capital of civilization. Right? Drawing from the wisdom of the past, as well as the continuing indwelling of the Spirit, the continuing of Pentecost, might I say. And then what types, in terms of official Catholic social teaching, do we have? So these are some of the primary sources for official Catholic social teaching. Papal encyclicals like Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti, and of course, Rerum Novarum in 1891 is usually identified as the beginnings of what is referred to as modern Catholic social teaching. Then we have conciliar documents, such as the Vatican II documents, Gaudium et Spes in particular. And then Episcopal conferences, that is bishops' conferences, also produce teaching documents, social teaching documents. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, in the 1980s, the pastoral letter on war and peace, tremendous document. The pastoral letter on economic justice are two examples. The USCCB has some tremendous texts around the environment long before Laudato Si. But I will say that all things considered, the USCCB has stepped back from the depth of producing documents pertaining to social issues, right? And we can talk about that later if you desire. And so here, Gaudium et Spes, it is in the Second Vatican Council in which this notion of reading the signs of the times is popularized, right? It doesn't have its beginnings at the council, but it is certainly popularized in Gaudium et Spes and by John the 23rd, who I'm happy to say, as a little aside, before he became the Bishop of Rome, was an affiliated member of the Institute of the Brothers of the Christian Schools, an AFSC. He was affiliated in 1937 as a young Vatican diplomat. He started his diplomatic service in Bulgaria. But he met our brothers and students at our school just beyond the Spanish Steps in Rome. He, as a young priest studying in Rome, became the chaplain to the brothers community at our school there, and to the brothers community as well as to the school. What are some of the major themes that we find in CST? And so here I group them as 6 foundational themes. Oftentimes you'll see 7 principles listed. You'll also see them listed in a litany of 10. I've also seen over time a litany of 12, and so on and so forth. But here I'm grouping them as 6 major themes, and you can see them without me reading them all. All right? So just take a quick look. Right? You're familiar with many of them. And then there's another grouping of themes that have their origins in more recent decades. Certainly from about the Vatican Council forward, we begin to see these themes arise more prominently in Catholic social teaching and in Catholic social thought. Okay? But I want to spotlight this document. In one of the most cited passages from Catholic social teaching, found in paragraph 6 of Justice in the World, articulates a challenging mission for the church with the claim that, quote, action on behalf of justice. Right? I quiver, I shake every time I read this statement. It is a tremendous statement. Action on behalf of justice. And participation in the transformation of the world. Transformation of the world. Appear to us as a constitutive dimension. That is a constitutive dimension of the preaching, and I like to also say the teaching of the word. Right? We front the gospel, but it's the whole word, might we say. I think sometimes that we don't give enough attention to the Hebrew prophets, right? Jesus' preaching and teaching was because of his knowledge of the Hebrew prophets. So that should remind us that we too should not lose sight of the Hebrew prophets. So I want to front this document as a lens for trying to focus our attention, sisters and brothers, on the call of Scripture and the call of the tradition to Catholic education writ large. Okay? So let us just pause here for a moment and just take hold of this one statement, this one sentence, paragraph 6, of what is a very thin document. This document is a very thin document, right? And it comes, as you see the date, on the heels, in the aftermath, immediate aftermath of the council. Pope Paul VI is the one who started the whole synod process. The council couldn't say everything, right? And so one of the reasons why the Synod process was to continue the life of the council. And this was one of the first major Synod of Bishops, 1971, that produces this document. So again, we pause. And I ask you, what do you hear? What do you see? Okay? Again, take a moment to digest. What do you hear? What do you see? Movement 3. Reaching New Horizons, Catholic Christian Education, Justice, and Hope. Considering the intersection of faith, mission, and pedagogy, which is the subtitle of the lecture series, Withering Catholic Education, Faith, Mission, and Pedagogy in the 21st Century. So considering that intersection of faith, mission, and pedagogy, institutions of Catholic higher education should aim to cultivate a faith that does justice. Catholic education writ large, right? And I've been fussing as I was drafting, right, when to specifically reference just higher education and reference Catholic education writ large. Again, this applies to all of Catholic education, but again, I'm fronting higher education for a moment. Institutions of Catholic higher education should aim to cultivate a faith that does justice, pursuing a mix of interdisciplinary moral inquiry and action dedicated to justice education and research for the common good. That is human flourishing, with communities locally and globally. I want to pay particular attention to two things that are necessary to reach a new horizon, to reimagine how we in the church, in the Catholic Church, and by extension, Catholic education, are to function in the democratic polity to enact an unwavering commitment to advocacy for the common good, right? Advocacy links us back to Justice in the World, where it says, our task is the transformation of the world. And to make afresh the Catholic commitment to critically educate in Christian faith as a vital social responsibility, because it is more evident than ever that the quality of religion is crucial to the well-being of civil society and the public realm. Doing so will allow Catholic education to reconceive its identity as a prophetic witness of solidarity and a ministry with the disinherited and minoritized populations in particular. Let me just pause there for a moment. A ministry. I think Hosman Ospino, again, also from Boston College, the chair of the Religious Education Department, protege of Thomas Groom, who was the second keynote speaker at the conference at the University of San Diego last month, he makes a good point when he says that when we look across mission statements, and he was focusing on higher education institutions in particular, we see references to lots of things. But one of the things we don't often see reference to is the ecclesial dimension, right? That these institutions are a ministry of the church. And what's the implication of an institution as a ministry of the church? And there, it's important to remember another little document from the Second Vatican Council itself, and that is the Declaration on Catholic Education. Another thin little document, yet significant. And it reminds us of the ecclesial dimension and the evangelical dimension of Catholic Christian education. So let's continue then. Through this intertwined complexion of the educator, that is, prophetic witness of solidarity and the ministry, with those, as we say in our Lasallian language, those who are entrusted to our care, through this intertwined complexion of the educator, the result is to render the reign of God articulate. God's reign is made visible by providing a greater understanding of the church's social mission through curricula, to foster values that will deepen students' sense of church, as well as their sense of responsibility as citizens. Jesus' construal of God's reign shows that it is something to be realized as both personal holiness and social justice, to shape both a deeply spiritual yet also a social reality, to shape both the prayers and the politics of disciples. It is important to consider what difference Catholic education makes, what relevance it has to the reign of God. Lisa Sol Cahill, also of Boston College, explains why the question of relevance is key, not only just academically, but also at the existential level. She states, students are frequently engaged in their own quests for the transcendent reality through exploring the meaning and the truth of the religious traditions in which they have been raised. Especially today, they are interested in the potential of religion to create or undermine solidarity with those who suffer. Let's just go back for a second where she says that students, young people, even those who fall into this, some people tussle with the use of nuns, right? But let's just go with that term, that wide term for those who are largely disaffiliated from organized religion, that they too, as well as those who are active in church life, have their quest for the transcendent. But as we just on this retreat just a few days ago at Bon Secours with our new teachers, listening to our brother William Mann, FSC, talk about faith and the transcendent within the context of Lasallian spirituality, how does it become real, the transcendent, so that it's not so theoretical? And in my own smallness, sharing thought with our young colleagues, I venture to say that the transcendent are right in them. When students see their face, they are the face of God. There's the transcendent. Their witness in the classroom as educators, there's the transcendent. That is why I think we're on solid ground to say that the classroom is a sacred place. John Baptist de La Salle, the founder of my institute, the patron saint of teachers of youth, reminds us that the Christian school is to be a sign of the reign of God. And so this student engagement that Cahill astutely describes is predicated on an understanding that faith and religion are about creating a critical consciousness in those who seek its challenge, comfort, and wisdom. And so I'm interested in the unequivocal stance of the early post-conciliar period that the church's task involves both educating and acting on behalf of justice. In her book, Educating in Faith, religious education scholar and practitioner Mary Boyes chronicles what is called the Medellin shift, referring to the Episcopal Conference that was held in Medellin, Colombia, the Medellin shift as marking a new chapter in evangelization. The proclamation of the gospel, the good news, is inextricably linked to the way people live. Michael Warren, a religious education and catechetical scholar, posits that the quantum leap that happened as a result of the Medellin movement is a recognition of the relation of catechesis to political realities and to a realization that the beloved community has to attend to systemic evil found in social and political structures. Indeed, sisters and brothers, the 1971 Synod of Bishops statement, Justice in the World, articulates an exegetical understanding that affirms the Medellin conclusions and functions as a key source for religious education and catechesis. The thrust of his prophetic vision is again that statement that we dwelt on just moments ago. Action on behalf of justice, transformation of the world, and that it is a constitutive dimension of the teaching and the preaching of the word. So let me begin to shift for some final thoughts. So this catechetical theological moment, and I say catechetical theological because some of our sisters and brothers in higher education, they all say, as they tell us at CTU, we don't do catechesis, we do theology. I will say we can't do good catechesis without good theology. But anyway, that's a whole nother issue. This catechetical theological moment advances the ends of a hermeneutics of reading the signs of the times, a phrase expressed by John the 23rd and popularized by Gaudium et Spes. Kenneth Himes, OFM, also of Boston College, notes the following. Moral activity is intimately connected to the religious mission of the church. For without the lived witness of disciples, the proclamation of the gospel becomes less persuasive. So recognizing that Catholic education is tied to the religious mission of the church, Catholic social teaching, Catholic social tradition writ large, gives educators in the wide realm of Catholic education the grammar to articulate in and through curriculum what it means to act on behalf of justice and participation in the transformation of the world. The way Catholic social teaching functions as theological and missiological discourse affords educators the space, an explicit curriculum vital to Catholic identity, to thus interpret for their students social realities theologically and contextually. The hope is to help students develop an understanding of witnessing solidarity and committing to a practice of justice. In brief, acting on behalf of justice, in the words of the 71 Synod of Bishops, is a spiritual act. Groom displays this point vividly. Spiritual beings need a pedagogy that engages and delves into their very souls, into the depths of their human spirit, appealing to them personally and as persons. Indeed, their minds must be well engaged too. But it is in the soul, and only through the soul, that life-transforming education in faith can take place. We engage and nurture people's souls by turning them to reflect on their own lives and what matters most to them. We encourage and nurture people's souls by encouraging them to appropriate and see for themselves the wisdom of Christian faith, to make its spirituality their own, to choose to live their lives by its light. So this analysis, sisters and brothers, helps us see something crucial about education and spirituality. as Groom understands it. In a strict sense, the role of pedagogy must be understood as the way to nurture a person's soul, to nurture the journey of life, as Dwayne Huebner might say. Dwayne Huebner was a curricular theorist and religious educator at Union Theological Seminary and Teachers College when they had a joint program, and then he migrated to Yale Divinity. It is on that level of being that life-transforming education in faith unfolds. As Henry Giroux observes, pedagogy always represents a commitment to the future. It remains the task of educators to make sure that the future points the way to a more socially just world. And Groom posits unequivocally, every graduate of a Catholic school should emerge with a deep commitment to promoting the quality of life, to justice as a seamless garment, and to protecting the integrity of creation. They ought to come out committed to oppose all sinful social structures and to help reform them or create new ones. So this is why critical engagement with the Catholic social tradition is vital, given the goal to forge critical consciousness. And so I conclude, in light of listening to some of his students, Jesuit theologian and Loyola Marymount professor Thomas Rausch observes, there is a tendency to make everything nice, to dumb down the challenge of the gospel and of the Christian discipleship. Robert Bergman suggests we need to disrupt our students' lives. To do so, it demands educating students into a disciplined sensitivity, into the struggle for justice, and education marked with the sign of the cross. And so with that, I ask you once again just to take a moment to just digest some of the thoughts from Movement 3. What did you hear? What did you see? And so with that, I will decrease and allow you to increase as you desire.
Well, before we do our Q&A, let us definitely have some applause here. We're going to try, hopefully, everybody say a prayer, hopefully the mic works. I'm sure there's a trick to it here. That might be it. Does that sound good?
Yep.
Wonderful. Well, Ernest, I don't know if you guys heard us talking before the presentation, and I'd asked him. So of course we have the soundtrack microphone for the recording, but then I asked him. I said, "Do you want the the room mic, to project your voice?" And he says, "No, I don't need it." I think he was correct. Well, I think you really brought some of these threads that we have been developing through the course of the lecture series, and hopefully that we will be able to engage a little bit further during the symposium that will feature again all of our presenters. I think the tie-in with Catholic social teaching, some of the rich intellectual tradition of the church, I think is absolutely appropriate. And so I think I would kick off the Q&A portion, and then when I do that, I'm going to pass the mic around so that everybody can hear everybody else, and also so that the camera, for everybody that will be watching at home, that they can hear your questions as well. The thing that I would say, there's two things that struck me initially. One, I think a title of this could have almost been from that last segment, "Oh, blessed disruption." I think, seriously, I think that would have been, the sense that there is this, that, the teachers within that, the sense of Catholic social teaching, educators, are staging in a constructive way, a disruption of, some thoughts, some unhealthy trends, some unhealthy attitudes that we have in the world, in our society, that need to be disrupted. And I think that that is part of our mission as Christians. If you look at the ministry of Jesus, the ministry of Paul, and so many others, Vatican II would be probably, in our own era, a great example. These were enormous disruptions. These were enormous disruptors. And so I think that's there. The other thing, though, I thought that was very, pronounced at the end, and I sort of traced it in your interludes, where it was, what do you see, what do you hear, is this notion of praxis. And to the extent that educators, whether they be educating in a Catholic school or Catholics educating in a public school, which has been by and large my experience as an educator in the college and university system. Nevertheless, I think the see, judge, and act that forms the core of praxis is enormously consistent with all of these traditions. And to the extent that we can help young people, whether they be in the early stages of education or in advanced education, understand that cycle, that call to critical thought. When we look at the world in which we live in, with all the crises and divisions that we see, the see, judge, and that final bit, act. That, in my view, is the linchpin of the raison d'etre of Catholic education. It is getting us to think critically about the world that we inhabit, but ultimately then to say, what do we do now? And so that was my I think, big takeaway in listening to the many things that you offered in this talk. Again, I think, what a treat. This is a great way for me to end my week. Hopefully you all feel the same. And so without any further ado, I'm going to pass the mic off for anybody that would like to ask Brother Ernest, Dr. Ernest, some questions. Or make comments. Gino.
Thank you, brother. One of the questions that goes through my mind is, in our contemporary world, where there is so much social upheaval and economic prosperity, and also the exact opposite of economic prosperity. How do you make some of these principles have some leverage in that great chasm?
I missed the last one. How do we get?
How do we get some of these principles to have some influence on this great chasm
Leverage
in our society?
Yeah. Thank you, Father Gene. There's debate still about whether Catholic social teaching, official church social teaching, is the best kept secret or not, right? People critique that in various ways, but I side on that it remains one of the best kept secrets. Until it is no longer a secret, until Catholic social teaching and the Catholic social tradition as a whole can infiltrate, penetrate, inform, shape, and mold curriculum, I don't think we're going to have that capacity for it to be a lever. Because too many people don't know it. And so part of the focus of my study while I was at CTU and thereafter is, as I see it, having been in, on the faculty of 3 of our secondary schools and having been in roles to where I get to visit many schools and interact with teachers, et cetera, et cetera. Catholic social teaching, the Catholic social tradition is little taught, Part stop. It does not have the prominence that it should. If the contention I'm making that Scripture and the tradition is calling Catholic education to bring the reign of God into the whole of the curriculum, and that the lens, as I am suggesting here in the talk, that justice in the world and the wider Catholic social tradition is ground for curriculum. Right? But it is little known. Right? In the secondary schools, right, it may be a semester course. On the collegiate level, unless students self-select at a Catholic institution alone, they're not going to encounter this rich tradition. They just don't. Right? I wish at some point I could find the time to actually do a formal systematic study. So that's a anecdotal assertion, but I think I'm on solid ground. Right? You have centers like the Center for Social Concern at Notre Dame, and other universities have such places, and they're doing great work. But on the main, right, it is not capturing the great swath of students who come through our doors, right? So that's part of the issue. And then a second observation I'll make is that it is too little heard from the pulpit. That was the subject of last June's Martin's preaching conference at Notre Dame. And that is the dearth of preaching in the liturgy and preaching elsewhere, but specifically in the Eucharistic liturgy, on Catholic social teaching and the wider Catholic social tradition. So those two areas, in curriculum of schools and in the pulpit.
Thank you, brother.
Other questions? Coming around to you.
Good evening. I'm Deacon Michael from Nativity Parish.
Nice to meet you. Here in
Great
Archdiocese.
The question I have is, as you see students coming into your higher education system, do you see a difference in preparation between students that are coming from Catholic schools and Catholics that are coming from public schools? Or is there a significant difference in their preparation for these things?
That's a great question. I think where, as I listen to colleagues and others, where there certainly is a great difference is, right, students who come from Catholic schools and matriculate into Catholic secondary schools, right, they're bringing a certain ethos, right, a certain way of being, right, as opposed to many students who are coming from public schools, like public elementary schools in the Catholic high schools, right? So there's an appreciable difference one can suggest there, right, just in terms of the general ethos, right? I don't get a sense, though, that students who are coming from Catholic elementary schools are necessarily have been given some sort of initial introduction to Catholic social teaching, and thus when they encounter it in high school, right, they can jump right into it, right? So if I could separate those two things, right? Not being an elementary school person, and maybe our superintendent might be able to speak more to that, I don't know to what degree in religion curriculum or elsewhere students would specifically be encountering Catholic social teaching, at least in terms of, text, right? They're probably encountering it in some ways and may not fully realize, right, how this is connected to the tradition, right, until they get to the high school course. But my contention is that on the high school level, the norm is a semester course, right? Usually, in many places, it's the junior year, it's a semester of morality and a semester of social justice, right? It's a rarity that, Catholic social tradition forms a whole course. There are a few schools, some of our, I know one of our LaSalle schools in the Twin Cities areas, for example, has they have a trimester system, which is a rarity in a secondary school to have trimesters. But to the degree that a high school can have trimesters, that means they can have more courses. So this school of ours in the Twin Cities areas has an elective course called Micah 6-8. My goodness, that's a rarity. An elective course, Micah 6-8, right? And I was just making a fuss a moment ago, right, about the Hebrew prophets, and here is that rare course that is entitled Micah 6-8. How specific can we get, right? But I think that's a rarity, right? But in general, I think there is some difference, and many of our teachers, administrators will pinpoint that there is a difference in general ethos of how students coming out of Catholic elementary schools are prepared than students who are coming out of public school, just, in terms of the ethos, right, of how you move and have your being. Yeah.
I think there was another hand up.
Yes,
Abbott.
Abbott.
Ernest, with your hope and desire and challenge that the Catholic social teaching, affects the curriculum. It's not a course, but it's in your travels and in your knowledge of particularly Catholic higher education institutions. Presumably some of the students, if they take theology courses, would be exposed to one degree or another to the tradition. But what about the education departments in those schools? Do you have any sense that there's a dialogue between the disciplines with some sense of the view that you're proposing here is the one that moves us forward? So that teachers are taught in a very different way in a Catholic institution, if you're blessed to have a Catholic higher education institution in your diocese, and some have more than one of those.
That's a great question. Let's first just think for a moment about theology and religious studies departments. The norm is that in most Catholic colleges and universities, there is a minimum theology, religion requirement. Usually it's 2, in some places 3, in some places 1. In some places, even any minimum requirement is beginning to disappear. But be as it may, it's still on the main, let's say a minimum of 2 requirements. But those 2 requirements normally, in most instances, is not going to pertain to the Catholic social tradition. That's what I mean by unless students self-select beyond the 2 mandatory required courses, self-select, course that my dear colleague at LaSalle University, Maureen O'Connell, offers, a series of courses, they're not going to encounter the tradition. And why you hear so many people being quoted in my text here from Boston College, because Boston College does have a tremendous bank, reservoir of faculty in their theology department who teach in the field of the Catholic social tradition. That's why you hear so many names from Boston College. I don't have a sense, as regards education departments, that you would find what you are asking. We're struggling with just having education departments within our own institutions, and I don't think it's unique to our LaSalle institutions. And again, there's 1 or 2 exceptions, but in general, you will find a dearth of our own charismatic tradition being presented in an education department, in an institution that bears the founder or our tradition, right, is education, right? So just on that narrow lane, right, there's a struggle. And then, Abbott, you're asking about, what is happening in terms of our education departments engaging in the Catholic social tradition? In general, no. Right? My answer is in general, no. I mean, and indeed, when I began, my thoughts with Movement 3, right, I made a reference to interdisciplinary, right? So the potential is there, right? The potential is there. But on the whole, I'm just sad to say that my knowledge is we would not find the Catholic social tradition being offered in any significant way in an education department. I hope there, and I trust there perhaps some exception. Now, that does not mean that education departments are not dealing with issues of social justice. You see what I'm saying? But not from the wellspring of bringing the richness of the Catholic social tradition, the cultural wealth, as Dwayne Huebner would say, into the larger public discourse, right? And so that's why, you hear me drawing on a Henry Giroux, who is a curricular theorist, and Dwayne Huebner, et cetera, because I think there is a wealth of bringing Catholic discourse in the conversation with other discourses as well. So the potential is there, but I don't think it's being, to use Gene, leveraged. I don't get that sense. Any other thoughts or comments? So there's work to be done, right? There's work to be done, but I'm sad to say, as I stand here right now, that at several Catholic colleges and universities, including at the immediate moment, one of our own, where the School of Education was already sunset, and the Department of Education within the three departments in what was the School of Education and Health included the Department of Education is now in the School of Liberal Arts. But that is now threatened. That is the Department of Education itself, right? Particularly, sisters and brothers, for small Catholic colleges, medium-sized Catholic, right? The education department, and I trust the superintendent is aware of some of this as well, there's a dearth of people who are matriculating through departments of education. Now, we also got to remember, including myself, I did not major in education, right? But as it is, there is a dearth of people who are matriculating through departments of education, particularly at small and medium-sized Catholic institutions and other institutions, right? And I stand here with great sadness that there are religious studies, theology departments, right, that go by different names, depending on where you are, that are also threatened as I stand here. At one of our own institutions, and at several other Catholic institutions as well. And as you may know, right, the Jesuits pulled their sponsorship from Wheeling Jesuits several years ago, before the pandemic, when the board made a decision to basically cut almost all of the humanities and arts. And they concluded, right, we can't be associated with a school that does not have a theology department, right? So that's what I mean earlier when I was further introducing myself, that we have to work on board education and formation, right? And at one of our own institutions, the new chair of the board, who comes from a very prominent executive position, graduate of the institution, has come in, and an executive has been appointed as the new president, et cetera, and it is just causing chaos, just great chaos. I could say more, but I will pause.
Brother, I'm a parishioner at Our Lady of the Most Holy Rosary Catholic community, and just this year, this school year, became a catechist, and I teach confirmation too. And there have been some units or segments of lessons on Catholic social teaching,
Okay.
so I'm glad. But my question is, do you know if seminaries and in their connections to like the Catholic, the Union, the institution that you attended and Father Stephen attended. in
The Catholic
Chicago.
Theological Union in Chicago?
Yes. Do they have courses for seminarians that then will have influence in a parish, on a parish level, once they're ordained? So that people who don't have access to higher education, you know, like in our community,
Yep.
a very small percentage of people have gone to university and smaller percentage gone to a Catholic university among the adults in the parish. So that there would be that dissemination of Catholic social teaching from the pulpit.
Yes, appreciate your question. So CTU, right, which is both as a school of theology, graduate school of theology ministry, you know, has a mixture of both seminarians as well as lay people, and that includes men and women religious like myself. We are lay, I like to remind ourselves. But and so yes, I think CTU is positioned across many departments, but certainly they have a department specific to the Catholic social tradition, or should I say had, right? Again, you know, people retire, there are pressures, and people are not replaced, but certainly at the point that I was there, and Stephen was there, and some of our other Norbertine confreres, that area was very strong at CTU, with the intent, right, as you say, with that intent, definitely. Now, ultimately, it's up to the individual of how they're going to exercise their education, right? And one of the strongest areas, I think Stephen would agree, at CTU has been certainly the liturgical and preaching department, right? And indeed, one of the finest of the teachers was the homilist at Father Matthew's first Mass, which I was so pleased to attend at the Abbey in De Pure, right? So CTU does have the resources, the personnel, but at the end of the day, it's up to the individuals how they leverage that. And I appreciate you making mention of your teaching in the religious education, right? I will say that, if I recall correctly, when I was in the novitiate in Skinny Atlas, New York, which is outside of Syracuse, we were pulled to teach in the religious education program in the local parish in the little village of Nice Things, which is Skinny Atlas. And I do recall that there was some rudimentary elements referring to the Catholic social teaching. But here's my critique, and this was John Baptist de La Salle's concern about religious education in the school versus religious education in the parish. You know, as it has developed over time, maybe he would be pleased today, perhaps. But he believed that religious education should join the secular subjects in the school as a whole project. My critique about what we did in Skinny Atlas is that we could have stayed up for 24 hours and done the whole course. When sports and other things interfered with the students being in the class, that took them away, right? So, yeah, so there's an imbalance there, but I'm glad you make note that it does appear in that space. And so, you know, leverage it as much as you can. Yeah, so thank you.
Madam Superintendent, you had a question?
Oh, yes.
Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to let you know that here in the Archdiocese, and I've taught in other states and other countries as well,
Oh,
that
mercy.
we have, you know, Catholic social traditions are taught as age appropriately in the elementary and the high schools as well. However, I think within the last decade or two, it is such a you have to be so careful as to not politicize, because you have parents and families coming from all walks of life with their own idealism, and as we are trying to teach the traditional faith, sometimes it is challenging to, you have a front with the parents and sometimes even the parish priest. And I do see that the world around us has become very divisive. And when we do teach what is right and just, you can find yourself in a difficult situation. And it is a sad situation that we are afraid to teach our faith in a faith-filled school or environment, supposedly. Do you see that up in the higher education levels as well?
Certainly, how all of that plays out in the higher education level differs than, right, in elementary and secondary schools and parishes, right? Just the nature of the university, right, you would agree, there is more room, not to say that controversy doesn't arise, but there's much more room to engage on subjects than, right? But you raise a very important point. The question is, how do we confront that as opposed to running away from it? So one of the things I would say, Madam Superintendent, is in a certain way, there is a need for critical education, a critical pedagogy, if you will, to and for and towards parents. We're talking about, in some instances, parents who themselves came up through Catholic education. And so, with more time, I could have spoken to, make the argument that, and let me put it perhaps interrogatively, is that an example of the absence of rigor as regards, when those parents were students, the absence of rigor as regards the teaching of the Catholic social tradition, right? I'm thinking of this board chair of one of our colleges, right? Who would have gone to his alma mater at a time when probably there was, and still this college has a minimum of 3 theology requirements. Whether it's, specifically Catholic social tradition or not, it would seem to me that shouldn't he have some ground to be questioning how things are proceeding under his leadership and the appointment of the boards of the new president, right? So somewhere, for me, there's a gap in the rigor, right? So it's one thing to say that we have this course and we have this unit in this course and so on and so forth, but then I come to the question of rigor, right? We could have had a whole presentation just on, and I made some passing references to it, right, to this whole practice of a critical pedagogy, right? A critical pedagogy. So yes, but you're right, the controversy, and it's in our age right now, and I think another reason for it is the dearth of civics education. That is something else that has died in many places. Civics, just basic quality, rigorous civics education, right? We see these surveys that come out every so often of people who don't even know the 3 levels of the 3 levels of the federal government, right? And the interlocking relationship of those 3. What is federalism, right? This basic ignorance of just basic things of government, right? So I think that also plays a role as well. So if there's anything to encourage, not only to continue to strengthen our curriculum but see, remember, it's not only religion I'm arguing, right? We have to have quality courses on the tradition in the religion departments, but as Thomas Groom says, right, it's the reign of God should inform the whole of the curriculum, right? Theoretically, the whole of the curriculum. So I think we should also be looking, to the degree that we can, what is the state of civics courses in our high schools as well? I was pleased several years ago, I was in Massachusetts and I read the Boston Globe Sunday magazine, and Commonwealth of Massachusetts is one of those states that is full throttle bringing back civics education. And it was one of my favorite courses at my high school in New Orleans, was my civics honors course. Loved it.
Well, I would say if there's one thing I have, I always said that with Ernest, I always come away from the conversation learning something I didn't know before. But this is something I think we all know. You are a tough act to follow. So again, I want to thank you for coming all the way from New York to Albuquerque to deliver this concluding talk. But it's not quite done because, again, we are going to have, in April, we're going to have the online symposium with all three of our presenters, Father Matthew, Dr. Matthew, Superintendent Donna Illebrun, and of course, Brother Dr. Ernest. When that is finally finalized, that will be disseminated, and so that you can all have links, to see that and to participate in that. So we're looking forward to that. The other thing I would say is this is the first season of a lecture series that the library has done in this modality. We've had lecture series in the past, usually on a Saturday morning, and that might resurrect in terms of a time more convenient for folks to come out here to the Abbey. But as far as this modality, this is as far as addressing the kinds of questions and the urgencies and the exigencies and so on and so forth. That we are trying to kind of put together for this lecture series. This is kind of the pilot series, okay? And so a couple of things. I welcome any and all feedback in terms of for when we do this next year, how we can make our lecture series better, how we can reach more people, how we can engage issues that I think are relevant to Catholics and Christians and really any believers and people involved and engaged really in the project of human flourishing. And also, I would ask you as sort of a favor and as a help to all to us here as we're going to continue to do this. Tell people if you've enjoyed this lecture series, and hopefully you'll enjoy this symposium as well. If this is something that you have found life-giving, that you've found that you've indeed learned something that maybe you didn't know before, or gained a perspective you didn't have before, please spread the word. Say that that there will be more lectures at the Norbertine Abbey. That our website, our library, everything we'll be posting those dates and those times and those subjects and the presenters and so forth. So by word of mouth, sometimes that's the best form of advertisement. In addition, of course, to what we have online. But we want these to be by and large live events. We like bringing people here. We like hosting people. We like having these events. It's a great place for people to connect. To obviously people of the caliber of Brother Ernest and Father Matthew and Ms. Illebrun, but also it's an opportunity for you to connect with each other. I think one of our charism as Norbertines is very much about community, a living community, modeling community in a world increasingly that holds values antithetical to community. But this is an opportunity to bring people of various perspectives and various experiences and so forth together, to have these conversations. And I think as Ernest has very eloquently explained to all of us here this evening. These are the conversations we need to be having because we all ultimately, as Catholics, as Christians, are part of this project of education for the benefit of humanity and ultimately for the inbreaking of the reign of God. So again, thank you for those of you who have been to all the lectures, for those of you maybe have only been to one or this is your first one, thank you for coming out. Spread the word. We'll be doing more of these, but we need your patronage. God bless and Godspeed.